Indian people and anti-Black racism specifically.
The whole purpose of my original video was to bring awareness on casual racism and prejudices against Indian people.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving into a serious but necessary discussion, one that sparked a massive conversation online about racism between Black and Indian communities. A video recently went viral where a woman passionately spoke about how racism, no matter who it comes from, cannot be justified. And yet, in the comments, we see a divide between Black people and Indian people, arguing over who has it worse. Well, let's break this down. What is really going on here, and why is this such a sensitive issue? Let's talk about it.
So that makes it okay, and people who know better should inflict the same cycles of behaviour. What? I've literally seen Black people be racist to Indians too. But that don't mean I'm going to sit here and say it's okay when Indians are racist back to Black people. And I'm not denying that some people can be racist in every culture. But I'm not talking about ignorant people here. I'm talking about those of us who know better. I'm talking about the same people who want to scream racism, but continue to remain ignorant. In the context of what I'm speaking about, and to the level of this racism, no argument can justify it. These are innocent people making food and just doing their bit in their country, trying to earn a living. And people in the comments are using it as an excuse to be racist. And this comment just backs all of that up. I think it's sad that Black and brown people experience so much racism and then decide to point fingers at each other. But I'm not here to get into that. My point was that every single one of those videos have millions of views and hundreds and thousands of comments, of which most of them are racist towards Indian people. And no matter what anyone says, that racism cannot be justified.
Hi guys, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the last video that I had made regarding racism and prejudice against Indian people. As I'm going through the comments, I can see that it has Indian people going up against Black people going up against Indian people, whether it's Africans versus Indians or African Americans versus India. Let me just stop you there. I'm gonna remind you, we are both people of color. We are both equals. There's no reason for comments like Black people trying to be like Indian people or Indian people trying to be like Black people. That not making sense. Indian people and Black people were both discriminated against, put into slavery, degraded, and so on and so forth. For us to be fighting with each other like this, it simply don't make sense, because we are literally brother and sister. The whole purpose of my original video was to bring awareness on casual racism and prejudices against Indian people. But then as I was going through the comments, something else hit me. A lot of people are not even familiar with the history behind Indians. No one really speaks up about the struggles our ancestors faced when the British was roaming free in Trinidad running things, when they was roaming free in India running things, and so on and so forth. Google is free. Feel free to go ahead, look up the history, go ahead and share with the world. Do as you please. But I'm gonna remind you to just love one another, because we are both equals. We are both brother and sister and brother at the end of the day. A lot of you know my page is always good vibes only. I promote good vibes, entertainment, things like that. Occasionally the water does get hot, but that's okay, because these are the conversations that we need to have. I love you guys. Stay blessed. Mwah.
I think one thing I'll never understand is how the majority of my hate comments come from North Indians, especially North Indian men. Like, I don't get it. I mean, I do. But what do you get for being so anti-Black and colorist? I just don't get it.
Hi friends, I hadn't planned on making another video right now, but Indian people are coming for me in my comments. And, so I know I'm on the right track with what I'm saying. But what I want to talk about in this specific video is Indian people and anti-Black racism specifically. So whether this is within the country of India, or whether this is when Indian people immigrate to any part of the world, whether it be on the African continent, in North America, South America, wherever, Indian people have. And again, I'm not saying every single Indian person, but I'm talking about Indian people generally, our society, our culture, the belief systems that Indian people cold, etc. Indian people are extremely, extremely racist, especially towards Black people. And if you take a Black person who has been around Indian people for any period of time, Black people pick up on this. It's something that is, this is not a secret. Whether you're talking to, say African students who study in India, which there are African students who are there, or whether you're talking about, say, Kenyans. There's a large population of Kenya that are Indian people that have immigrated to that country, or South Africa, or Canada, or, the United States, whatever. But Black people pick up on Indian people's racism because it is quite apparent. It's something that that is there. It's obvious. So I'm just going to give you an example of me, my family, and the Indian people in South Africa. When I grew up there, I spent the first 12 years of my life under apartheid. So we had servants, maids, cooks, gardeners, etc. And all of these people were Africans. They were Black people. And all of the Indians in South Africa had servants. Okay, they were all Black. Now, how were these servants treated? They were treated as subhuman. They were not considered to be human beings with feelings. They drank out of different cups. So Indian people would not share their table with the servants, who were an integral part of their household. They took care of their children. They drove them everywhere. They cooked for them. But they had to eat off of separate dishes. They could not sit on the furniture. They, say, for example, when we left our home and we traveled, so we lived in Pietermaritzburg, we traveled to Durban on the weekends, holidays, whatever. Our maid would come with us. She was not allowed to sleep on or sit on our furniture or sleep on our furniture, so she had to sleep on the floor. These are things that all Indian people did in South Africa. And now I'm just talking about South Africa. I'm not talking about, say, when Indian people immigrate to other countries. But this is true even in first generation Indians. Because, say, if an Indian person had to marry a Black person, 9 times out of 10, that Indian person's family is going to completely disown the Indian person who married a Black person. Now, Indian people generally, they want Indian people to marry within their they want Indian people to marry other Indian people, and then they even go into they want, the same caste, and they even have subcastes and all of this stuff. So, but if an Indian person marries a white person, or say an Asian person, it's not considered to be as heinous of an act as if an Indian person married a Black person. So this can be tied to the caste system because, like I mentioned in my previous video, Indian people are racist towards other Indian people. And some of this is based on skin color. It's not entirely based on skin color, but there is a factor that is, that is apparent in that. So Ava DuVernay made a movie called Origin, and it's based on Isabel Wilkerson's book Caste, which somebody just pointed out. And it's very difficult for me to talk about these very heavy topics in 10 minutes. So I can't cover everything, but Indian people are inherently racist as a culture and as a society. And then within that racism, there is a hierarchy. So yes, while an Indian society might be racist towards Western people, Western culture, white people, etc., just like Vivek Ramaswamy making that comment about how, he made all these disparaging comments about, Americans, and he was talking about white Americans.
This entire discussion highlights something incredibly frustrating: the way racism between black and Indian community is being debated as if it's some kind of competition. What is even worse is that people who should know better, people who claim to be against racism, are excusing their own prejudice by pointing fingers at other side. Let's be very clear here. Racism is wrong, period. There is no version of it that suddenly becomes justified just because it's coming from someone who has also experienced oppression. If a black person is a racist toward an Indian person, that is wrong. If an Indian person is a racist toward a black person, that is also wrong. The oppression of one group does not erase the discrimination faced by another, but somehow the conversation never stays on that point. Instead, people keep resorting to, well, they did it first argument, as if that changes anything. The woman in the viral video said it's best people who actually understand racism, people who claim to fight against it, shouldn't be the ones repeating the same cycles of behavior that completely defeat the purpose. Now let's step back for a second and talk about how we even got here, because this whole situation between black and Indian communities isn't new. It's been drawn for decades, even centuries, and a lot of it has roots in colonialism and historical segregation. Both Africans and Indians were oppressed by European colonial powers. African nations were colonized and their people were enslaved or exploited for resources. Meanwhile, Indians were also used as indentured laborers and sent to places like South Africa, the Caribbean, and East Africa to work under harsh conditions. In places like South Africa, Indian communities were treated as a middle class, not fully accepted by white colonial rulers, but still placed above black Africans. This created resentment. Black South Africans saw Indians benefiting from a system that was built on their oppression, but at the same time, Indian people in this region also faced discrimination from white rulers and were trapped in their own struggle for a recognition and rights. So what happened? Instead of uniting against the real oppressors, these communities were pitted against each other. Divide and conquer worked exactly as the colonizer intended, and unfortunately that history lingered together today. In countries like Kenya, Uganda, and South Africa, there is still tension between black and Indian communities. Some of it is rooted in real economic disparities, but a lot of it is just old prejudices that haven't been unlearned. Now let's talk about how something that needs to be addressed: the very real problem of anti-black racism in Indian community. This isn't about bashing Indian people as a whole, but the truth is that colorism and anti-black resentment run deep in many Indian societies. The caste system, which has existed for thousands of years, has always favored lighter skin. Bollywood and Indian media constantly push fairness creams and promote a rotatory beauty standard, and that doesn't just stop within India. It carries over when Indian communities migrate to other parts of the world. How many times have we seen Indian families disown relative for marrying a black person? How often do we hear about black students being harassed in India? African students studying in India have literally been attacked and accused of being drug dealers just because of the color of their skin. That is not something we can just ignore. And in places like South Africa, the older Indian generation still hold on to racist attitudes from apartheid times. I'm not here saying every Indian person is racist, because that is obviously not true. But we cannot pretend like anti-blackness isn't deeply ingrained in many Indian communities. But let's not ignore anti-Indian racism either. At the same time, it's also true that Indian people face racism, and that racism shouldn't be justified either. Right now, social media is filled with comments making fun of Indian people, mocking their accent, calling them smelly, making fun of their food, and just demoralizing them in every way possible. And a lot of these comments are coming from black people. That is why the original video was made in the first place, to call out how casual racism against Indian people is being normalized online. And instead of people actually reflecting on that, the conversation turned into a pointless back and forth about who is more oppressed. This is the exact kind of division that stops real progress from happening. If we truly believe in fighting racism, then we have to fight all forms of it, no matter who it's coming from. The problem with how people are reacting, the worst part about all of this, is that instead of having productive conversation, people are just doubling down on biases. When someone says, hey, Indian people face racism too, the response shouldn't be, well, they are racist to us, so who cares? That is not how this works. Likewise, when someone brings up anti-black racism in Indian communities, the response shouldn't be, well, black people are racist too. Again, that is not the point. Two things can be true at the same time. One, yes, many Indian people have deep-rooted anti-black attitude that need to be addressed. Two, yes, Indian people also experience racism, and that should not be ignored. This conversation needs to be about accountability, not deflation. If someone points out racism within your community, the right response isn't to list all the ways the other group is racist. The right response is to actually address the issue. So where do we go from here? The only way forward is through education, self-reflection, and actually listening to each other. Indian people need to have serious conversations within their own communities about anti-black racism because it's real and it's harmful. Black people need to have conversations about how casual racism against Indian people is also unacceptable because it's just like anti-black racism that is real and harmful too. And honestly, we need to stop acting like calling out racism means excusing other forms of oppression. The whole they did it first argument is childish. If we want to break these circles, we need to be better. At the end of the day, black and Indian people are not enemies. We have way more in common than we do differences. And the sooner we stop letting racism divide us, the better off we will all be. That is it for today, yo. Let me know what you think in the comments. Have you experienced this kind of racism firsthand? Do you think this conversation is being handled the right way? Let's talk about it. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next one.